The shattered glass crunched beneath Emily Chen's boots as she stood in the ruins of the Blue Phoenix, watching 15 years of dreams disappear in a sea of splintered wood and broken bottles. But as she surveyed the destruction, these thugs had unleashed upon her beloved bar something awakened inside her, a force that would make them wish they'd never crossed paths with a former Marine turned bartender. They thought destroying her business would break her spirit. Instead, they created their worst nightmare. Before we dive deeper, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow we have something extra special coming your way. The neon sign of the Blue Phoenix cast a soft azure glow across the rain-slicked streets of downtown Providence, Rhode Island. It was just past midnight, and Emily Chen stood behind the century-old mahogany bar, polishing glasses while keeping a watchful eye on the Friday night crowd. The bar had been her sanctuary since returning from her third tour in Afghanistan. 5 years ago, a place where the nightmares faded and purpose returned. Another masterpiece boss? Marco Rodriguez, her head bartender, grinned as he watched her craft one of her signature cocktails. At 28, he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who had found their calling, much like Emily had when she first bought this place. "The Phoenix Rising," Emily replied, adding a final flourish of flame-kissed orange peel to the deep crimson drink. "My grandfather's recipe with a few modern twists." The cocktail had become legendary in Providence's historic district, much like the story of how Emily had transformed a rundown dive bar into one of the city's most beloved establishments. Detective James Morrison nursed his usual whiskey at the corner of the bar, his weathered face creased with concern. "They're buying up properties all along the waterfront," he said quietly as Emily refreshed his drink. "The Constantine Group. They're not just real estate developers. Word is they've got connections that make my captain nervous." Emily's jaw tightened. The Constantine Group had been systematically acquiring properties throughout the historic district, turning century-old buildings into soulless luxury developments. The Blue Phoenix sat right in the middle of their planned marina project, a project that would erase generations of neighborhood history. "They made an offer on O'Malley's pub yesterday," Marco added, checking his phone. "Triple market value." Katie said her dad almost took it. Inside her office, Emily studied the framed photograph of her grandfather, Chen Wei-ming, standing proudly in front of the bar on opening day in 1962. He'd come to America with nothing but determination and a handful of family recipes, building the Blue Phoenix into a neighborhood institution. During the Vietnam War, it had been a sanctuary for veterans. During the recession of the 80s, it had been a gathering place for workers fighting to keep their jobs. Now it was Emily's turn to protect that legacy. The evening crowd was starting to thin when Emily Parker, Emily's childhood friend and the bar's financial manager, rushed in clutching a stack of documents. "Emily, we need to talk. The health department, the fire marshal, the licensing board, they're all scheduling random inspections, 3 in 1 week. That's not a coincidence." Emily recognized the pattern. Other businesses that had resisted the Constantine Group had faced similar harassment, mysterious code violations, anonymous complaints, sudden tax audits. "They're trying to wear us down," she said quietly, her military training kicking in. Never let the enemy dictate the terms of engagement. Through the window, she noticed a black SUV cruising past the bar for the 3rd time that night. Inside, her office, the wall of memories told the story of the Blue Phoenix. Photographs of regulars who had become family, newspaper clippings about her grandfather's famous hospitality, medals from her own service days, and a worn Marine Corps flag that reminded her daily of the oath she'd taken to never surrender. "Victor Constantine doesn't take no for an answer," Detective Morrison warned, his voice carrying decades of street wisdom. "He's got half the city council in his pocket and the other half too scared to speak up. The last bar that stood up to..." Him? Mysterious electrical fire. Insurance wouldn't cover it. Emily's fingers traced the carved dragon on the bar's edge, a detail her grandfather had added for good luck. "This isn't just a bar," she said, her voice quiet but steel-edged. "It's a piece of this city's soul. Every scratch on this wood, every story these walls have heard. You can't put a price on that." As the last customers filed out, Emily noticed Marco tensing as he looked out the window. 3 more black SUVs had parked across the street, their engines still running. Through the rain-streaked glass, she could make out figures in expensive suits stepping out into the night. "Boss." Marco's voice carried an edge she hadn't heard before. "Whatever happens, you know we're with you, right? The whole staff, we're—" "Family?" Emily nodded, her combat-honed instincts already assessing angles, exits, potential weapons. They thought they were dealing with just another small business owner. They were about to learn that some phoenixes don't just rise from the ashes, they burn everything in their path. The night was about to become very interesting indeed, and Emily Chen was ready for war. Little did her enemies know, they had just picked a fight with someone who had spent years perfecting the art of turning impossible odds into decisive victories. "Ladies and gentlemen, last call," Emily announced, her voice carrying over the mellow jazz playing through the Blue Phoenix's vintage speakers. The remaining patrons, mostly regulars who knew the rhythm of the place as well as their own, heartbeats, began gathering their belongings. The old bar had a way of keeping people longer than they intended, wrapped in its warm wooden embrace and comfortable conversations. Behind the bar, Emily moved with practiced efficiency, her hands flowing through the familiar closing routine she'd perfected over 5 years of ownership. Each bottle wiped and returned to its proper place, each glass inspected before being stored, the ancient cash register carefully balanced, rituals that grounded her, much like weapons maintenance had during her Marine Corps days. "The health inspector called again," Emily said, emerging from the office with her tablet in hand. Her usually cheerful face was creased with worry. "He's coming tomorrow morning, and he's bringing someone from the building department." Emily nodded, continuing her methodical cleanup. "Let them come. We've passed every inspection for 5 years straight. Grandfather ran this place for 40 years before that, without a single violation." The bar's heavy door swung open, bringing with it a gust of rain-scented air and a figure Emily hadn't seen in years. Michael Torres, her former squadmate, filled the doorframe with his imposing presence. "Permission to come aboard, Sergeant?" he grinned, using her old rank. "Mike?" Emily set down the glass she'd been polishing. "What brings you to Providence? Can't a guy check up on his old CO?" He settled onto a bar stool, his casual demeanor belied by the alertness in his eyes. "Though I hear you might need some backup. Word travels in certain circles about the Constantine group." Marco, who had been restocking the beer coolers, paused. "His work. You know about them?" Michael's face hardened. "Private security consulting is my business now. The Constantine group has a reputation. They use ex-military contractors for their persuasion work. Some of them were blacklisted from legitimate security firms for being too aggressive." Emily absorbed this information with the same tactical focus she'd used to analyze intelligence reports in Afghanistan. "They've been increasing pressure. Strange cars watching the bar, sudden inspections, suppliers mysteriously cancelling deliveries." "Classic. Siege tactics," Michael nodded. "Cut off resources, isolate the target, then move in for the kill. But they didn't count on targeting a Marine, did they?" Detective Morrison, who had lingered past closing, joined the conversation. "Emily, there's something else you should know. The fire at O'Malley's pub last month? Evidence disappeared from the evidence locker. My partner was warned to drop the investigation." The vintage jukebox in the corner, a restoration project Emily had completed herself, switched to Miles Davis's "Kind of Blue." The melancholic trumpet seemed to underscore the gravity of their situation. Emily pulled up security camera footage. On her tablet. Look at this. Same black SUVs have been circling the block every night this week. They're watching us, learning our patterns. Emily moved to the window, studying the rain-slicked street outside. The Blue Phoenix's neon reflection rippled in puddles, creating miniature light shows on the wet pavement. This street, this neighborhood, had been her grandfather's home since fleeing political upheaval in Taiwan. He'd built something here that meant more than just business. It was a testament to the American dream itself. Your grandfather would be proud. Mrs. Wong, their elderly neighbor who ran the Chinese apothecary next door, had stayed late to share her concerns. He always said you had his spirit, too stubborn to bend, too strong to break. Emily smiled, remembering her grandfather's stories of how he'd kept the bar open during the riots of '67, becoming a safe haven for people of all backgrounds when the city was torn by violence. The Blue Phoenix had always been more than just a bar. It was a symbol of resilience, of community, of hope. They're planning something big, Michael said, his tactical mind clearly running scenarios. The marina project is worth billions. They won't let one bar stand in their way, no matter how historic it is. Then we better be ready, Emily replied, her voice carrying the same quiet authority that had once led Marines through sandstorms and firefights. Marco, call the staff meeting for tomorrow morning, early before the inspectors arrive. Emily, I need every piece of paperwork we have, licenses, permits, health certificates, everything. Detective, anything you can legally tell us about their operations would be appreciated. What about me, Sarge? Michael asked, though his slight smile suggested he already knew the answer. How long can you stay in town? As long as needed. I've got some contacts too, other vets who owe us from our days in the sandbox. One call, they'll be here. Emily looked around the bar, at the walls that held so many memories. Photos of regulars who had become family, memorabilia from her grandfather's early days, the corner table where local heroes had gathered for decades. Politicians, artists, activists, veterans. Each piece told a story of survival, of community, of fighting for what's right. They think this is just business, she said quietly, her hand resting on the smooth wood of the bar her grandfather had lovingly maintained for 4 decades. They're about to learn it's personal. Outside, another black SUV cruised past, its tinted windows reflecting the Blue Phoenix's neon glow. Inside, Emily Chen and her allies prepared for a fight that would test not just their strength, but their understanding of what it truly means to protect what matters most. The morning light filtered through the Blue Phoenix's stained glass. Windows, casting colorful shadows across the antique wooden tables. Emily had gathered her entire staff, 12 loyal employees who had become more like family over the years. The tension in the room was palpable as they waited for the health inspector's arrival. Everything's spotless, boss, Marco reported, finishing his 3rd check of the kitchen. Even my abuela's kitchen isn't this clean, and she could perform surgery in there. Emily burst through the door, her face flushed with urgency. 2 of ye. Our suppliers just cancelled, the craft brewery and our main liquor distributor. Both cited internal policy changes, but I just got off the phone with Jimmy at the brewery. They were threatened, something about potential licensing issues if they kept doing business with us. Emily's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, Michael entered from his surveillance position outside. 3 men in suits just parked around the corner, one's carrying what looks like official inspection documents. But the other 2, he shook his head. They're carrying professional stance, concealed weapons, definitely private security. Listen up. Emily addressed her staff, her voice carrying the same authority that had once commanded Marines in combat zones. Whatever happens today, remember, we're not just protecting a bar, we're protecting a legacy, a piece of this community's heart. If anyone wants to step away, no judgment. This could get ugly. Not a single person moved. Their 70-year-old, Dishwasher, who had worked with Emily's grandfather, spoke up first. "My father and your grandfather survived the White Terror in Taiwan together. They built new lives here. No thugs in fancy suits will make me abandon their dream." The health inspector, a thin man named Jenkins, entered with his 2 assistants, following closely. His eyes darted nervously around the room as he pulled out his clipboard. "Routine inspection," he mumbled, not meeting Emily's gaze. "Plus some concerns about potential structural issues." "Of course," Emily smiled, her military training helping her maintain a calm exterior. "Although we just passed inspection last month with a perfect score, Emily has all our documentation ready." As Jenkins began his inspection, Emily noticed one of his assistants taking photos of the bar's layout, paying particular attention to entry points and the ancient electrical panel. The other kept touching his earpiece, clearly communicating with someone outside. Detective Morrison chose that moment to walk in, accompanied by a woman Emily didn't recognize. "Morning, Emily," he called out casually. "Thought you might want to meet Andrea Santos from the Historical Society. She's very interested in the Blue Phoenix's significance to Providence's cultural heritage." The 2 men in suits shifted uncomfortably as Andrea pulled out official-looking documents. "This building has been nominated for historical landmark status," she announced, her voice carrying across the room. "Any modifications would require extensive review and approval." Jenkins nearly dropped his clipboard. One of the suits stepped outside, speaking urgently into his phone. Emily caught Michael's slight nod, a silent confirmation that their countermove had landed effectively, but their small victory was short-lived. By afternoon, the pressure intensified. The bank called about irregularities in their business. Loan. The insurance company emailed about policy reviews. Even the local news website published a suspiciously timed article about health concerns in historic district restaurants. "They're trying to strangle us bureaucratically," Emily said, scrolling through the mounting challenges on her tablet. "Death by 1,000 paper cuts." Emily stood by the window, watching another black SUV cruise past. The bar's ancient jukebox, seemingly sensing the mood, switched to Johnny Cash's "God's Gonna Cut You Down." The irony wasn't lost on her. "Miss Chen." A smooth voice cut through the tension. A tall man in an impeccable suit stood in the doorway, his Russian accent subtle but present. "Victor Constantine, I believe we should talk." Emily recognized him from news photos, the public face of the Constantine Group, known for his charitable donations and political connections. But she also recognized the predatory gleam in his eyes, the same look she'd seen in warlords and corrupt officials during her deployments. "My office," she replied calmly, leading him past the wall of photos that chronicled the Blue Phoenix's history. She noticed his eyes lingering on her Marine Corps medals displayed behind the bar. "Impressive service record," Constantine remarked, settling into a chair. "Afghanistan, 3 tours. Distinguished Service Cross. You understand strategy, yes? Then you must see that resistance is inefficient." He placed a document on her desk. "Final offer. 3 times market value, plus generous relocation assistance. The Blue Phoenix name, recipes, everything. You can rebuild anywhere else in the city." Emily glanced at the offer, then at the photo of her grandfather on the wall. "Mr. Constantine, do you know why my grandfather named this place the Blue Phoenix?" Without waiting for his response, she continued. "In Chinese mythology, the Blue Phoenix represents not just rebirth, but justice. It appears when righteous people need protection against corrupt power." She slid the document back to him. "The answer is no." Constantine's pleasant demeanor cracked slightly. "Miss Chen, surely your military experience taught you to recognize unwinnable battles. The Marina project will proceed. The only question is whether the Blue Phoenix ends with dignity or..." He let the threat hang unfinished. "My military experience taught me something else," Emily replied, standing to signal the end of the meeting. Sometimes the most important battles are the ones everyone else thinks you can't win. As Constantine left, Emily noticed more black SUVs arriving, parking strategically around the block. Through the window, she saw men in suits speaking into earpieces, photographing the building's exits. The siege was tightening. Michael appeared in the doorway. "That went well," he said dryly. "You know they're not going to stop now." Emily nodded, her hand resting on the carved dragon that had watched over the bar for 60 years. "No," she agreed. "They're going to escalate. And when they do," her eyes hardened with determination, "they're going to learn what happens when you back a Marine into a corner." The first sign of real trouble came just before midnight. The Blue Phoenix's ancient electrical system suddenly failed, plunging the busy Friday night crowd into darkness. The backup generator, which Emily had personally maintained weekly, mysteriously failed to kick in. "Everyone stay calm." Emily's voice cut through the darkness, steady and authoritative. The combat flashlight from her Marine days, always kept under the bar, illuminated her face. "Marco, start closing out tabs. Emily, get the emergency lights." From the storage room, before Emily could move, the bar's front window exploded inward, showering the nearest patrons with glass. Through the new opening, something metallic clattered across the floor. A smoke grenade, military grade. Emily recognized the distinctive shape instantly. "Everybody out! Back exit," she commanded, her combat training taking over. As acrid smoke began filling the room, she vaulted over the bar with practiced efficiency. The emergency exit's push bar had been welded shut, a professional job, done quickly and quietly. Michael appeared through the smoke, already moving to help guide panicked customers toward the kitchen exit. "Emily, we've got multiple hostiles outside. This isn't just intimidation anymore." The sound of breaking glass came from multiple directions. Now, more smoke grenades. Through the haze, Emily caught glimpses of figures in tactical gear entering through the broken windows. This wasn't just the Constantine Group's usual private security. These were professionals, moving with military precision. "Boss!" Marco's urgent voice carried from the kitchen. "They're blocking the back alley." Emily's mind raced through options, just as she'd done countless times in urban combat situations. The Blue Phoenix's layout, every corner and crawl space she'd explored over 5 years of ownership, flashed through her mind. Everyone upstairs, through the old bootlegger's passage. The hidden staircase, a relic from Prohibition days that her grandfather had preserved, would lead them to the building next door, Mrs. Wong's apothecary. As Emily helped guide the last customers towards safety, she heard the distinctive crack of her antique mirror being smashed, followed by the splintering of the century-old bar top. "They're destroying everything," Emily choked out, both from smoke and emotion. "Keep moving," Emily ordered, but her heart twisted as she heard more destruction below. The jukebox, the photo wall, generations of memories, all being systematically demolished. Through the smoke, a familiar voice called out, "Consider this a negotiating tactic, Miss Chen." Victor Constantine's smooth accent carried clearly. "The Blue Phoenix ends tonight. The only question is whether anyone else needs to get hurt." Emily helped the last civilian customers through the passage before turning to her staff. "Go, all of you. This isn't your fight." "Like hell it isn't." Marco stood his ground, and others nodded in agreement. But Emily could see the fear in their eyes. These were bartenders and servers, not soldiers. "That's an order," she said firmly. "I need you to make sure everyone gets to safety. Call Detective Morrison. Document everything." Her voice softened. "Please." As her staff retreated reluctantly, Emily heard heavy boots on the main staircase. They were coming up. Michael, who had remained behind, took up position beside her. "Just like Kandahar?" he asked grimly. "Worse," Emily replied. "In Kandahar, I didn't have to worry about keeping the building intact." The first attacker appeared at the top of the stairs. professional-grade riot gear making him look more military than private security. Emily moved with practiced efficiency, using his own momentum to send him crashing back down into his colleagues. The narrow staircase worked to her advantage, becoming a choke point. But they were professionals. As she and Michael held the stairs, the sound of breaking glass from below was replaced by something more ominous, the distinct odor of accelerant being spread. "You smell that?" Michael tensed. "They're going to burn it down," Emily realized, her voice hollow, just like O'Malley's pub, just like the other businesses that had stood against the Constantine group. The attack at the stairs intensified, forcing them to retreat further back. Through the gaps in the fighting, Emily caught glimpses of her beloved bar being systematically destroyed. The wall of photographs was in flames now, 60 years of community history turning to ash. "Time to go, Emily," Michael shouted, laying down cover as more attackers reached the top of the stairs. "We can't save it." The heat was intensifying, flames spreading rapidly through the historic wooden structure. Emily felt something break inside her as she heard the massive bar top, lovingly maintained for generations, crack and splinter in the inferno. They retreated through the secret passage, emerging into Mrs. Wong's apothecary just as the first fire engines began wailing in the distance. From the street, Emily watched as flames consumed the Blue Phoenix. The neon sign flickered one last time before going dark forever. Victor Constantine emerged from a black SUV, straightening his expensive suit as he surveyed the destruction. "A regrettable development," he called out to Emily. "Insurance should cover it, though I hear sometimes claims for electrical fires get complicated." Emily stood silent, covered in soot and sweat, cataloguing every face, every vehicle, every detail of this moment. She felt a familiar coldness settling over her, the same focused clarity she'd known in combat when everything narrowed down to survival and justice. "You okay, Sarge?" Michael asked quietly, using her old rank. "They think this ends tonight," Emily replied, her voice carrying a deadly calm that made even the seasoned private security men step back. "They think burning down the Blue Phoenix will break me." She turned to look at Constantine, letting him see the promise of retribution in her eyes. "They have no idea what they just started." Emergency vehicles were arriving now, too late to save the historic building. But as Emily watched her life's work burn, something else was igniting. A determination that would make Victor Constantine wish he'd never heard of the Blue Phoenix or its owner. As dawn broke over Providence, the smoking ruins of the Blue Phoenix cast long shadows across the rain-soaked street. Emily Chen stood among the debris, her boots crunching on broken glass and charred wood. The acrid smell of smoke still hung heavy in the air, mingling with the lingering scent of spilled whiskey and burned memories. "Fire Marshal's preliminary report just came in." Detective Morrison approached, his face grim. "They're calling it an electrical fire. No signs of accelerant, no evidence of forced entry. Everything that might have proved otherwise, apparently. Burned too hot." "Of course it did," Emily replied, her voice carrying the steel edge of controlled fury. She knelt to pick up a partially burned photograph, her grandfather on opening day, proudly standing behind his new bar. The edges were charred, but his smile remained clear, almost defiant. Emily arrived with coffee and a stack of papers, her usually immaculate appearance showing signs of a sleepless night. "Insurance company already denied the claim. They're citing insufficient maintenance of electrical systems and some fine print about riot exclusions. The bank's calling in our loans, effective immediately." Michael, who had spent the night coordinating with his contacts, joined them. "My sources confirm what we suspected. The team that hit us, they're ex-military, mostly Eastern European. Professionals. They've done this before, all up and down the East Coast. Always the same pattern: electrical fires, insurance denials, properties sold at a fraction of their value." Mrs. Wong offered us her back office to use as a temporary headquarters, Marco announced, arriving with several other staff members. None of them had gone home, spending the night helping salvage what little they could from the ruins. She says the Constantine group's been trying to buy her building too. Half the block got offers this morning, way below market value. They're using the fire to drive down prices. Emily moved through the debris methodically, her military training evident in how she catalogued every detail. The safe in her office had been cracked, not burned, but professionally opened. The hard drives from their security systems were missing. They had known exactly what they were doing. "We've got movement," Michael warned quietly. A line of expensive cars was approaching, led by a familiar black SUV. Victor Constantine emerged, looking fresh and polished despite the early hour. "Miss Chen," he called out, his voice carrying false sympathy. "A terrible tragedy. Perhaps now you'll be more receptive to our offer, though given the circumstances I'm afraid we'll have to revise the terms." Emily felt her staff tensing around her, but she held up a hand, keeping them back. "You burned down my bar, Victor. Did you really think that would be the end of it?" "Accidents happen, especially in old buildings," he shrugged. "Though it seems many businesses in this neighborhood are having maintenance issues. Just this morning, 3 more properties have agreed to sell. The smart ones can see which way the wind is blowing." Before Emily could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me, Mr. Constantine." Andrea Santos from the Historical Society approached, accompanied by several official-looking individuals. "I'm afraid all demolition and construction activities in this area are now frozen." "On what grounds?" Constantine's smooth facade cracked slightly. "The entire block has been nominated for emergency historical preservation status," Andrea explained, handing him a thick document. "Given the suspicious pattern of fires in historically significant properties, the State Preservation Office is launching a full review." Emily noticed Constantine's security detail shifting uncomfortably. More vehicles were arriving, news vans, state police, federal agents. Detective Morrison had been busy. "Your bar is gone, Miss Chen," Constantine said quietly, all pretense of sympathy vanishing. "Take the insurance loss, walk away. Some battles aren't worth fighting." "You're wrong," Emily replied, her voice carrying the same authority that had once commanded Marines through firefights. "Some battles are the only ones worth fighting." As Constantine left, Emily gathered her allies. Michael had brought in 3 more veterans from their old unit. Emily had compiled documentation of similar accidents up and down the coast. Marco had organized the neighborhood business owners, many of whom had their own stories of threats and intimidation. In Mrs. Wong's back office, they set up their command center. Photos and documents covered one wall, showing the web of shell companies and suspicious fires that followed the Constantine Group's developments. Emily's military training kicked in as she analyzed patterns, identified weaknesses, and began formulating a strategy. "They thought burning down the Blue Phoenix would break us," she addressed her gathered allies. "Instead, they just showed us exactly who they are and how they operate. Now we know their playbook." "What's the plan, boss?" Marco asked, speaking for all of them. Emily pointed to the wall of evidence. "We're going to do what Marines do best. We're going to turn their own tactics against them. Every shell company, every corrupt inspector, every rigged insurance denial. We're going to expose it all." "They'll fight back," Michael warned. "Hard. Count on it," Emily nodded. "Which is why we need to be smarter. Detective Morrison is building a RICO case. Andrea's historical preservation status buys us time. Emily's following their money trail. But we need more." She laid out a map of the neighborhood, marking properties the Constantine Group had targeted. "They've been working in shadows, using fear and isolation to pick off targets one by one. Time to drag everything into the light." The gathered group leaned in as Emily outlined her plan. They had lost the Blue Phoenix, but from its ashes, something new was rising. Not just a fight for one bar, but a battle for the soul of a community. Outside, cleanup crews were already moving in, eager to erase all evidence of the historic bar's existence. But Emily Chen and her allies were just getting started. Victor Constantine was about to learn that some fires forge more than they destroy, and some enemies are more dangerous after you've burned away everything they have to lose. The first counterattack came at dawn 2 days later. Emily sat in Mrs. Wong's back office, surrounded by evidence boards and laptops, when Marco burst in with news that made everyone freeze. "They're demolishing it," he gasped, still catching his breath. "Right now. They've got crews at the Blue Phoenix site. They're saying it's an emergency safety measure." Emily and Michael rushed to the scene, arriving to find heavy equipment already tearing into the burned structure. Victor Constantine stood watching, a satisfied smile playing at his lips as he supervised the destruction of even the building's foundations. "You can't do this," Andrea Santos protested, waving preservation documents. "This site is under historical review." "Emergency municipal order," Constantine's lawyer replied smoothly, producing official-looking papers. "The structure has been deemed an immediate safety hazard. See, all the proper signatures." Emily's jaw tightened as she watched the last physical remnants of her grandfather's legacy being reduced to rubble. But something caught her tactical eye. The demolition crew was being surprisingly thorough with the foundation, almost as if they were looking for something. "They're searching for something," Michael muttered, noticing the same thing. "Look at how they're sifting through every layer." Detective Morrison arrived, looking troubled. "Emily, we've got bigger problems. The RICO investigation. All my files were seized this morning. Internal Affairs is suddenly investigating every case I've touched in the last 5 years. The systematic dismantling of their resistance continued throughout the day. Emily discovered their bank accounts had been frozen due to a suspicious activity investigation. Marco reported that former employees were being approached with a mixture of bribes and threats to sign statements about health code violations during their employment. "It gets worse," Michael added, showing Emily his phone. "My security contracts. 3 major clients cancelled this morning. Someone's pressuring them." Mrs. Wong shuffled into the office, looking worried. "Emily, you should see this." She handed over a letter from the city planning department. The entire block had been rezoned overnight, with the historical review process mysteriously accelerated and denied. How? Andrea was stunned. That process should take months, minimum. The paperwork alone, unless someone's been planning this. "For years," Emily said quietly, pieces clicking into place. "The Blue Phoenix wasn't their first target, it was just another step in a much bigger operation." She turned to the evidence wall, seeing it with new eyes. "Look at the pattern. Every city where they've operated, they didn't just buy properties. They changed zoning laws, replaced planning officials, restructured entire departments. The fires, the corruption, it's all just cover for something bigger." A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they watched as police cars surrounded Mrs. Wong's building. Officers began entering other businesses along the street, producing warrants for various inspections and document seizures. "They're not just trying to shut us down," Emily realized, frantically backing up files as they watched the coordinated operation unfold. "They're trying to erase any evidence we've gathered." Emily's phone buzzed, an unknown number. "Hello." "Miss Chen," Victor Constantine's voice oozed false concern. "Quite a day for the neighborhood, isn't it? So many regulatory issues coming to light. But I'm still willing to be reasonable. Walk away now. Convince your allies to do the same. And perhaps these various investigations might resolve themselves favorably." Through the window, Emily watched as more police units arrived. Not just local cops, state police, federal agents, even Homeland Security vehicles. The show of force was overwhelming, designed to intimidate the entire community into submission. You still don't understand what you've started, Emily replied, her voice deadly calm. You think this is about money, about property. You think, if you apply enough pressure, everyone will fall in line. No, Miss Chen, Constantine's voice hardened. You don't understand. You're not just fighting me. You're fighting progress itself. Change is coming to this neighborhood, to this city. The only question is whether you and your friends want to be casualties of that change. As if to emphasize his point, the demolition crew at the Blue Phoenix site began working faster, the sounds of destruction echoing down the street like artillery fire. "Clear everything out now," Emily ordered as soon as she hung up. "Emily, get all our files to the backup locations. Marco, warn the other business owners. Michael." Already on it, he nodded, making calls to his own network of contacts. "But Emily, we're running out of places to retreat to." Mrs. Wong, who had been quietly observing, suddenly spoke up. "Not everywhere." She shuffled to a back wall, pressing a hidden panel to reveal a narrow passage. During Prohibition, every business along this street was connected. My father showed me when I was young. Most people forgot, but the old tunnels are still there. Emily. His tactical mind immediately grasped the potential. Underground routes throughout the neighborhood, hidden spaces perfect for gathering evidence and organizing resistance. The very history Constantine was trying to destroy might become their greatest weapon. "They think they're winning," Emily told her remaining allies as they quickly relocated their operation underground. "They think overwhelming force will make us surrender, but they just showed us something important." "What's that?" Marco asked, helping to move their evidence boards. "How scared they really are," Emily replied, her eyes hard with determination. "You don't bring this much force unless you're terrified of what your enemy might expose." Above them, the sounds of the neighborhood being systematically dismantled continued. But beneath the streets, in the very foundations of the history Constantine was trying to erase, a resistance was taking root. The real war was just beginning. Deep in the Prohibition-era tunnels beneath Providence's historic district, Emily Chen studied the documents spread across a makeshift table. Old blueprints, property records, and surveillance photos covered. The weathered wood, illuminated by military-grade tactical lights. The underground network had become their command center, a hidden fortress from which they could observe and document the Constantine Group's activities. "You need to see this." Emily rushed in, her footsteps echoing off the century-old brick walls. She laid down a stack of papers, internal emails obtained from a sympathetic city clerk. "The Marina project? It's not just about luxury developments. Look at the geological surveys they tried to bury." Emily's eyes narrowed as she studied the technical documents. These depth measurements, the soil composition studies, they're looking for something specific. "That's not all," Michael added, emerging from one of the tunnel's branching passages. "My contacts in the Corps of Engineers finally got back to me. The Constantine Group has been buying up similar waterfront properties all along the East Coast, always historic districts, always using the same playbook." Detective Morrison arrived next, looking exhausted but determined. "The internal affairs. Investigation into my cases, it led me down a rabbit hole." He spread out more documents. "Every cop who's ever investigated the Constantine Group gets the same treatment. But look at this pattern. The pressure always comes from federal agencies, not local ones." Emily's mind, honed by years of military intelligence analysis, began connecting dots. The historical properties, the waterfront locations, the federal involvement. She pulled out her grandfather's old journal, found in the Blue Phoenix's safe before the fire. "There's something here we're missing." Mrs. Wong shuffled into their underground headquarters, carrying her family's own records. "During World War II, she began, her voice carrying decades of preserved history, this whole neighborhood was different. The warehouses, the tunnels, they weren't just for bootlegging." She produced a yellowed photograph showing the waterfront. In the 1940s, military vessels were clearly visible, but something else caught Emily's eye. Those aren't regular cargo ships, her military training kicked in. Those are specialized transport vessels. The kind used for classified military cargo, Michael finished, leaning in. During the war and after, Marco, who had been monitoring current demolition activities through their network of hidden cameras, called them over to his laptop. They're not just demolishing buildings, he pointed out. Look at how they're excavating. They're searching the foundations methodically. Emily's phone buzzed, a secure message from Andrea Santos at the Historical Society. Found something? In the sealed archives, the text read. Project Atlantis, 1945-1962. All records classified, but it's connected to every property the Constantine Group has targeted. The Blue Phoenix, Emily said quietly, pieces falling into place. It wasn't random. The bar, the whole block, it's sitting on top of something they want, something buried decades ago. Emily was already searching through digitized records. Look at this. Seismic surveys from the recent construction projects. There are anomalies under every targeted property, voids that don't match any known utility or tunnel systems. Whatever it is, Michael added grimly, it's big enough that they're willing to destroy an entire neighborhood's history to get to it. Mrs. Wong nodded slowly. My father used to say there were parts of the tunnels we were never to enter. Sections that were sealed off by the military after the war. We all thought they were just stories. Emily spread out a modern map of the neighborhood, overlaying it with the historical photos and blueprints, the demolitions, the rezoning, the pressure from federal agencies. They're not just clearing the area for development. They're trying to access whatever's buried down here. But why now? Marco asked. Why such a rush? Detective Morrison held up a classified document he'd managed to obtain. Because of this. Executive order declassifying World War II-era military installations, effective next month. Whatever's down here, they want to get to it before it becomes public record. Emily's tactical mind raced through implications. That's why they're not just demolishing the buildings. They're destroying evidence, erasing history before anyone can connect the dots. And that's why they were so thorough in destroying the Blue Phoenix, Emily realized. Your grandfather's records, the original blueprints. He knew, Emily said softly, looking at his photo. He bought that building for a reason, protected it all these years. He was keeping something safe. Michael studied the underground passages stretching into darkness. These tunnels, they go deeper than this level, don't they? Mrs. Wong nodded. There are older sections sealed off decades ago. My father said some went down at least 3 levels. Emily stood, determination hardening her features. Whatever the Constantine Group is looking for, whatever they're willing to destroy our homes to find, we're going to find it first. They've got resources, government connections, Detective Morrison warned. If this really is classified military material, then we need to be smart, Emily replied, her military training evident in her tactical analysis. We don't just need to find what's hidden, we need to expose why they want it so badly. Emily, dig deeper into Project Atlantis. Michael, map these tunnel systems. Marco, keep monitoring their demolition patterns. She looked at the photos of her destroyed bar, her grandfather's legacy reduced to ash. They burned down the Blue Phoenix to bury their secrets. Instead, they just showed us exactly where to dig. Above them, the sounds of the neighborhood's systematic destruction continued. But beneath the streets, in tunnels that had kept secrets for generations, Emily Chen and her allies were about to uncover something that would make the Constantine Group wish they'd never heard of Providence's historic waterfront. They're coming. Marco's urgent voice crackled through their secure radio network. Multiple vehicles, tactical teams. They've found the tunnel entrance near Chen's old loading dock. Emily surveyed their underground command center, where weeks of gathered evidence and research covered the walls. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together. Project Atlantis, the classified shipments, the real reason behind the Constantine Group's systematic destruction of historic waterfront properties. How long, she asked, already moving, to implement their evacuation protocols? Minutes. They're using ground-penetrating radar, professional teams, military-grade equipment. Emily rushed to back up their digital evidence, while Michael and his veterans moved to defensive positions. But Emily knew this wasn't a battle they could win through force. Not here, not against these odds. Emily, Detective Morrison burst in, out of breath. It's worse than we thought. The FBI just raided my house. They're calling it a national security investigation. They're freezing everything. Accounts, evidence, witnesses. Through the tunnel network's old ventilation system, they could hear the heavy footsteps of tactical teams above. The web of century-old passages that had protected them was about to become a trap. Mrs. Wong's been arrested, Emily reported, her voice shaking. Health code violations, tax fraud, they're throwing everything at her. The other business owners are being rounded up too. Emily's jaw tightened as she watched their resistance crumbling. Everything they'd built, everyone who'd stood with them, it was all falling apart in a coordinated assault. Time to split up, she ordered, her combat experience taking over. Emily, take the digital evidence through the North Passage. Michael, get our witnesses to the safe houses. Marco, I'm not leaving, he said firmly, standing his ground. Neither are the others. Emily looked at her loyal staff, bartenders, servers, kitchen workers who had become soldiers in this underground war. They had lost everything already. There was nothing left to threaten them with. Victor Constantine's voice boomed through some kind of PA system above ground. Miss Chen, I know you can hear me. This pointless resistance ends now. Project Atlantis is a matter of national security. You've interfered with a classified military operation. Surrender now, and perhaps we can discuss terms. Emily checked her phone. No signal. They'd blocked communications. The tactical teams were getting closer, their methodical sweep of the tunnels echoing through the old brick passages. They found something, Detective Morrison said quietly, holding up a partially decoded document they'd discovered in the deepest tunnel level. Whatever was stored down here during the war, it's not just classified material. It's something they're terrified of the public discovering, which is exactly why we need to expose it, Emily replied. But even as she spoke, their last backup generator failed, plunging the command center into darkness. Only emergency lights remained. Emergency alerts began blaring above ground. This area has been designated a federal security zone, an official voice announced. All civilians must evacuate immediately. Failure to comply will result in arrest. They could hear sirens, police orders, the sounds of the neighborhood being forcibly cleared. The Constantine Group wasn't just coming for them. They were cleaning out every potential witness. Emily's voice shook slightly. Everything we've worked for. They're going to bury it all. Through the walls, they could hear demolition equipment starting up. They weren't just searching now, they were going to collapse the entire tunnel system. Your grandfather, Mrs. Wong had told Emily before. Her arrest, he always said the real treasure wasn't what the military hid down here. It was the truth about why they hid it. Emily looked at the evidence they'd gathered. Shipping manifests, classified documents, environmental surveys showing decades of contamination. The real crime wasn't just what was buried beneath Providence's historic waterfront. It was the generations of lives disrupted to keep it secret. The first explosive charge detonated somewhere in the tunnel system, sending vibrations through the century-old walls. They were running out of time. Emily, Michael warned, if we don't move now. Another explosion, closer this time. Dust rained from the ceiling as support beams groaned. Their underground fortress was about to become their tomb. Get everyone out, Emily ordered, her voice carrying the same command presence that had once led Marines through combat zones. Split up, different routes. They can't catch all of us. What about you? Marco asked, though he already knew the answer. Emily picked up her grandfather's journal and the most damning evidence they'd gathered. I'm going to pay Victor Constantine a visit. Time he learned what happens when you bury the wrong secrets. The walls shook with another explosion. The tactical teams were getting closer, their lights visible now through the dust-filled passages. This isn't surrender, Emily told her scattered allies as they prepared to split up. This is tactical retreat. They think destroying these tunnels will bury their secrets. Fine, let them think they've won. Michael caught her meaning. While they're focused underground, we take the fight up top. Emily nodded. Hit them where they're not looking. Make them regret every home they destroyed, every life they ruined. The final evacuation was completed just as the tactical teams breached their command center, finding only empty tunnels and cold coffee cups. But by then, Emily Chen and her allies were already scattered throughout the city, each carrying pieces of a truth that would shake foundations far stronger than brick and mortar. The Constantine group had won this battle, but they'd just unleashed something far more dangerous than what lay buried beneath Providence's streets. They'd created an army of people with nothing left to lose. Emily Chen sat in a dimly lit motel room on the outskirts of Providence, surrounded by the scattered pieces of their resistance. Maps, documents, and photographs covered every surface, telling the story of destruction and corruption that had consumed their neighborhood. But something had changed. The evidence they'd gathered from the tunnels had revealed a truth bigger than anyone had imagined. The contamination reports, Emily explained, pointing to environmental surveys they'd recovered. It's not just about what they buried after World War II. The chemicals they used, they're still leaching into the groundwater. Every property the Constantine group bought, every historic building they demolished. They're not just hiding history, Michael finished. They're covering up an environmental catastrophe. Marco burst in, clutching his laptop. You need to see this. Remember those soil samples we managed to get tested? The results just came back. The contamination matches classified military research from the 1940s. Whatever they stored down there, it's not just toxic, it's illegal under international law. Detective Morrison, now suspended but more determined than ever, arrived with more pieces of the puzzle. I called in every favor I had left. Project Atlantis wasn't just about storage. They were developing something down there. Something that violated every chemical weapons convention in existence. And the Constantine group knows, Emily said quietly, studying decades-old photographs of military shipments. That's why they're not just demolishing buildings, they're removing all traces of what happened here, including witnesses. Her phone buzzed with a secure message from Andrea Santos. The Historical Society researcher had been digging through newly declassified naval records. Look at these shipping manifests, she had written. The medical supplies they listed. It's coded language for chemical agents. And guess who signed off on the paperwork? Victor Constantine's grandfather. It's all connected, Emily realized, pulling up property records. Every city where they've operated, every historic district they've destroyed, they're all former military research sites. They're not developers. They're cleaners, erasing evidence of government crimes. Emily stood at the window, watching rain fall on the city that had taken everything from her. But now they had something the Constantine group feared more than any weapon: the truth. They made a mistake, she said, turning to her allies. They thought destroying the Blue Phoenix would silence us. Instead, they led us right to their biggest secret. Michael, who had been coordinating with his network of veterans, reported their growing support. Words spreading through military channels. A lot of people aren't happy about American soil being used for illegal weapons research, or about veterans' families being displaced to cover it up. But we need proof, Detective Morrison cautioned. Hard evidence that will stand up in court, something they can't bury or discredit. Emily pulled out her grandfather's journal, turning to a page she'd initially overlooked. Look at this. detailed maps of the tunnel system, including sections we never found. He knew. All these years, he knew what was down there. That's why he bought the Blue Phoenix, why he made sure it stayed in the family. He wasn't just running a bar. Mrs. Wong's voice came from the doorway. She had been released on bail, her gentle demeanor unchanged by her arrest. He was standing guard. We all were, even if we didn't know it. Marco's laptop pinged with an alert. They're moving faster now. 3 more demolition permits just got approved. Emergency orders, no review required. They're going to level everything within a week. Let them, Emily said, a plan forming in her tactical mind. They're so focused on burying the evidence, they don't realize we've already found what matters. Emily, those water test results, they're conclusive? Absolutely. The contamination pattern proves decades of illegal chemical, weapons storage, and the Constantine Group's own demolition work is actually making it worse, spreading the contamination further. Perfect. Emily began outlining her strategy. They want to bury the truth? Let's make it impossible. Michael, contact every environmental group you can find. Marco, get those test results to every news outlet in the country. Detective, time to call in any federal contacts who still owe you favors. What about Constantine himself? Emily asked. Emily pulled out a final piece of evidence, financial records, showing the real ownership of the Constantine Group. His grandfather didn't just oversee the weapons program, he profited from it. The entire company was built on blood money, and Victor's been using the same playbook, buying up contaminated sites, destroying evidence, silencing witnesses. But why expose it now, Marco wondered. Why not just keep burying it like they have for decades? Because of this, Emily held up a newly declassified document. In 3 days, the government is transferring ownership of all former military research. Sites to private contractors for environmental remediation. Guess who's first in line for the contracts? Understanding dawned on their faces. The Constantine Group wasn't just hiding past crimes, they were positioning themselves to profit from the cleanup, using taxpayer money to cover up their own family's crimes. So what's the play, boss? Michael asked, recognizing the look in Emily's eyes, the same one she'd had before leading dangerous missions in Afghanistan. They burned down my bar to bury their secrets, Emily replied, her voice carrying deadly certainty. Now we're going to use those same secrets to burn down their entire empire. Outside, the rain continued to fall on Providence's historic waterfront, washing away the ash of destroyed homes and businesses. But beneath the surface, something else was rising. Not just evidence of past crimes, but a reckoning that would shake the Constantine Group to its foundations. Victor Constantine had thought destroying the Blue Phoenix would end the fight. Instead, he'd just given its owner the ammunition needed to destroy everything his family had built on buried secrets and stolen lives. The press conference steps of Providence City Hall were packed with reporters, environmental activists, and displaced residents. Emily Chen stood at the podium, her military bearing evident as she faced the crowd. Behind her, Emily, Marco, Michael, and dozens of other allies created a wall of united support. 3 generations ago, Emily began, her voice carrying across the hushed gathering, the United States government used our neighborhood for classified weapons research. When that research proved too dangerous, too illegal to acknowledge, they buried it beneath our homes, our businesses, our lives. She held up a stack of documents, their evidence finally seeing daylight. The Constantine Group didn't come to Providence to build luxury developments. They came to bury the truth about what their family helped create. Screens behind her, lit up with test results, contamination maps, and decades of covered-up environmental data. Every electrical fire that destroyed a historic building, every rushed demolition, every forced sale, it was all to prevent the public from discovering this. Victor Constantine pushed through the crowd, his usual smooth composure cracking. This is slander. These allegations are completely unfounded, like the allegations against Mrs. Wong. Emily cut him off. The sudden investigations into Detective Morrison, the fabricated health code violations against every business owner who refused to sell. More images appeared on the screens. Military shipping manifests bearing the Constantine family name, classified reports about contamination, medical records showing decades of unusual illness patterns in the neighborhood. Your grandfather didn't just oversee Project Atlantis, Emily continued, her voice steady. He profited from it. And now 3 generations later, you're trying to profit from covering it up. News cameras rolled as Emily revealed the government. Contracts the Constantine Group had been positioned to receive billions in taxpayer money to clean up the very contamination their family had helped create. But you made one crucial mistake. Emily's eyes locked onto Victor's. You thought burning down the Blue Phoenix would silence us. Instead, you just showed us exactly where to dig. Detective Morrison stepped forward, accompanied by federal agents, not the ones Constantine had influenced, but a new task force formed specifically to investigate historical military contamination sites. Mr. Constantine, the lead agent announced, we have a warrant for your arrest. The charges include environmental violations, conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice. As Constantine was led away, Emily continued addressing the crowd. This isn't just about one company's crimes. It's about generations of families who lived and worked here, never knowing what was buried beneath their feet. It's about a government that chose profit over people, secrecy over safety. Emily began distributing detailed reports to journalists. Contamination data, health statistics, property records showing the pattern of destruction and cover-ups along the entire East Coast. The Blue Phoenix was more than just a bar. Emily's voice carried emotion for the first time. It was a guardian, a post established by my grandfather to protect the truth. When the Constantine Group burned it down, they thought they were destroying evidence. Instead, they just passed the Guardian's duty to a new generation. Michael and his veterans stood at attention as Emily revealed the final piece of their evidence, a comprehensive map of every military research site the Constantine Group had targeted, every community they had destroyed to hide the truth. Today, we're not just exposing one company's crimes, Emily declared. We're ending a cycle of corruption that has poisoned our communities for generations. The truth can't be buried anymore. The impact was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with the revelations. Environmental groups launched nationwide investigations. Government oversight committees announced emergency hearings. But Emily wasn't finished. She pulled out her grandfather's old journal, holding it up for all to see. The Blue Phoenix was named for a reason. In Chinese mythology, the Blue Phoenix represents justice rising from darkness. Today, that justice finally arrives. The announcement of a class action lawsuit followed, not just for the displaced residents of Providence, but for every community the Constantine Group had destroyed in their decades-long cover-up operation. Victor Constantine, being led to a federal vehicle, tried one last threat. You have no idea what you've done, he called out. The forces you're challenging. No, Emily cut him off, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced down worse threats in combat. You had no idea who you were challenging when you burned down my bar. The Blue Phoenix might be gone, but its spirit, the spirit of justice, of truth, of community that rises from every attempt to destroy it. As the press conference ended, Emily looked out over the crowd. Former employees, neighborhood residents, displaced business owners, all standing together, finally understanding the true scope of what they'd been fighting. What happens now? Marco asked quietly. Emily watched as federal teams began setting up investigation sites around the neighborhood. Environmental experts were already taking new soil samples. Historical preservation officers were documenting the destruction. "Now," she replied, "we rebuild. Not just buildings, but trust. Not just businesses, but community. And this time we build on truth, not buried secrets." The Blue Phoenix was gone, but its final legacy would be the exposure of a conspiracy that had poisoned communities for generations. Victor Constantine had thought destroying one bar would protect his family's secrets. Instead, he had triggered their final complete exposure. As the sun set over Providence's historic waterfront, Emily Chen stood in the ruins of her bar one last time. The physical structure was gone, but its purpose, standing guard over truth and justice, had been fulfilled in ways her grandfather could never have imagined. 3 months later, Emily Chen stood at the newly restored waterfront, watching as environmental cleanup teams worked methodically to remediate decades of buried contamination. The historic district was transforming, not into the luxury development the Constantine Group had planned, but into something far more meaningful, a testament to truth and community resilience. The final test results came back, Emily reported, tablet in hand as she joined Emily. "The cleanup is working. Groundwater contamination levels are dropping. The EPA estimates full remediation within 2 years." Emily nodded, watching crews carefully excavate the old tunnel system, not to destroy evidence now, but to ensure every trace of Project Atlantis was properly documented and cleaned. The process was being live-streamed, ensuring transparency that would have been unthinkable months ago. Victor Constantine's plea deal just went through. Detective Morrison approached, restored to duty with full honors. "He's naming names, exposing every official his family bought off over the years. The corruption cleanup might take longer than the environmental one. The Blue Phoenix's lot remained empty, but not abandoned. Community members had transformed it into a memorial garden, with plaques telling the story of not just the bar, but every business and home that had stood against corruption." "Mrs. Wong's appeal was approved," Marco added, grinning. "All charges dropped, the others too. Every business owner they tried to frame, every witness they tried to silence. They're all being cleared." Emily watched as Mrs. Wong directed. Volunteers in planting traditional Chinese medicinal herbs in the garden. The old woman's resilience had inspired many, showing that even the smallest businesses could stand against powerful interests and win. Michael arrived with more veterans, all part of the new Community Oversight Committee, ensuring the cleanup stayed on track. "Congress just approved the compensation package," he reported. "Every family displaced by the Constantine Group's activities in every city they operated in, they're all getting justice." The afternoon sun glinted off new signs, marking the Providence Historical District as a National Heritage Site. The designation didn't just preserve buildings anymore. It protected the truth about what had happened here, ensuring future generations would understand the cost of secrecy and the power of community. "Your grandfather would be proud," Mrs. Wong said softly, joining Emily with a pot of traditional tea, "not just of exposing the truth, but of how you've helped rebuild." Emily smiled, watching as former Blue Phoenix employees worked alongside community members to restore other historic buildings. Marco had opened his own restaurant 2 blocks over. Emily was running a community development non-profit. Even the old tunnel system was being preserved as a museum, telling the story of both Project Atlantis and the resistance that exposed it. Sometimes, Emily reflected, a place becomes more than just a building. The Blue Phoenix wasn't just a bar, it was a symbol of everything worth fighting for. Detective Morrison nodded toward the waterfront, where crews were installing new monitoring systems to ensure no future contamination could go undetected. The Constantine Group thought they could bury the truth forever. Instead, they forced it into the light. As evening approached, community members gathered in the memorial garden for what had become a weekly tradition. Former Blue Phoenix regulars, displaced residents, environmental activists and others whose lives had been touched by the struggle shared stories and renewed their commitment to protecting their neighborhood's legacy. Emily pulled out her grandfather's old journal, now part of the official historical record. "He wrote something here just before he passed," she told the gathered crowd. "The true measure of a phoenix isn't just its ability to rise from ashes, but what it chooses to become when it rises." The gathering had drawn media attention again. Journalists were documenting the community's transformation into a national model for environmental justice and historical preservation. Other cities were adopting Blue Phoenix protocols for investigating historical contamination and corporate corruption. "The foundation paperwork is finished," Emily announced, holding up official documents. "The Blue Phoenix Community Trust is now official. Every recovered asset from the Constantine Group's criminal operations will go toward protecting historic neighborhoods and funding environmental cleanup nationwide." Emily surveyed the scene: the restored waterfront, the healing community, the exposed truth, finally seeing sunlight. Victor Constantine had thought destroying her bar would end the fight. Instead, he had sparked a movement that would ensure no other community would suffer in silence. "We lost the building," she told the gathered crowd, "but we gained something, far more valuable. We proved that no company is too powerful, no secret is too deep, and no community is too small to fight for justice." As night fell, the Memorial Garden's newly installed eternal flame cast a warm glow over the gathering. The Blue Phoenix might have been destroyed, but its spirit had transformed into something far more powerful, a legacy of truth, justice, and community resilience that would inspire generations to come. The nightmare Victor Constantine had created when he burned down a bartender's dream had become his own worst nightmare, exposing decades of corruption and ensuring his family's true legacy would be as a cautionary tale about the power of underestimating those you try to silence. Emily Chen looked up at the stars, visible now that the construction dust had settled. The Blue Phoenix was gone, but its final transformation had achieved something her grandfather had fought for all along, a future where truth couldn't be buried, where community couldn't be bought, and where justice would always rise from the ashes of attempted destruction. The historic waterfront had been transformed, not by luxury developments, but by the power of exposed truth and community strength. The nightmare was over, replaced by something far more powerful, a legacy of justice that would ensure no other community would have to fight the same battles in darkness. 1 year to the day after the Blue Phoenix burned, Emily Chen stood behind a familiar bar, though in a very different setting. The new establishment, rising from the remediated grounds of the old neighborhood, wasn't just a bar. It was a living museum, a community center, and a testament to justice. To those who showed us that some fires forge more than they destroy, Emily raised a glass, addressing the packed crowd gathered for the opening night. The walls of the new Blue Phoenix told the story of their struggle, photographs, documents and artifacts chronicling not just what was lost, but what was gained in the fight for truth. "Your signature cocktail, boss?" Marco grinned, now a partner in the new venture. He crafted the Phoenix Rising with the same flourish Emily's grandfather had perfected decades ago, the flame-kissed orange peel casting dancing shadows on the restored century-old woodwork. Detective Morrison, recently promoted to lead a new corporate corruption task force, sat at his usual corner spot. 6 more cities have adopted the Providence Protocol, he reported. Every historical district with suspicious development patterns is being investigated. The Constantine Group wasn't the only corporation trying to bury toxic secrets. Through the windows, Emily could see the transformed waterfront. Where luxury condos had been planned, community gardens now thrived. The old tunnel system, properly remediated and preserved, had become an educational center, teaching visitors about both the dark history of Project Atlantis and the power of community resistance. "The environmental monitoring program is expanding," Emily announced, showing Emily the latest data on her tablet. "They're implementing our model nationwide. No more buried contamination, no more hidden health risks." Michael, who now headed the veteran-led Community Oversight Committee, added his own update. "Congress just approved funding for similar investigations at every former military research site in the country. The days of burying toxic secrets under neighborhoods are over." Mrs. Wong, her apothecary shop now a thriving cultural center, brought out traditional treats for the celebration. "Your grandfather once told me," she said to Emily, "that the true purpose of the Blue Phoenix wasn't just to serve drinks, but to serve justice. You have fulfilled that purpose beyond his wildest dreams." The evening's gathering wasn't just a celebration. It was a reunion of everyone who had stood together against seemingly insurmountable odds. Former employees who had risked everything, business owners who had refused to be silenced, activists who had helped expose the truth, and community members who had lost homes but found a greater purpose. Emily watched as visitors explored the memorial wall, where interactive displays told the story of Project Atlantis, the Constantine Group's attempts to bury it, and the community that refused to let truth remain hidden. The wall ended with news headlines announcing Victor Constantine's conviction and the unprecedented environmental cleanup effort that followed. "Sometimes," Emily addressed the crowd again, "our enemies think they know exactly how to break us. They think destroying a building, a business, a dream will be enough to make us surrender. But they don't understand that some legacies can't be burned away." The new Blue Phoenix had been designed to ensure no one would forget. The bar itself, crafted from reclaimed wood from the destroyed historic district, bore the scars of its history proudly. The ceiling's exposed beams showed the dates of significant events in the community's fight for justice. Even the cocktail menu told stories, each drink named for a moment in their struggle. "The final compensation checks went out today," Emily reported quietly. "Every family affected by the Constantine Group's actions, in every city they operated in, has finally received justice." But the victory wasn't just financial. The Blue Phoenix Community Trust, funded by seized Constantine Group assets, had become a powerful force for environmental justice and historical preservation nationwide. Other communities facing similar battles now had a blueprint for resistance and resources to fight back. "Your grandfather's journal," Mrs. Wong mentioned, nodding toward the preserved document in its place of honor behind the bar. "It's being taught in universities now. Future lawyers, activists, and community leaders are learning from our struggle." Emily smiled, remembering the words her grandfather had written decades ago. Some phoenixes rise from ashes, not to return to what they were, but to become what they were always meant to be. The new Blue Phoenix was proof of that transformation. It wasn't just a bar that had risen from destruction. It was a symbol of community resilience, a center for activism and education, and a reminder that no corporation was powerful enough to bury the truth forever. As the evening wound down, Emily stood at the window, watching the sunset paint the restored waterfront in shades of gold and purple. The eternal flame in the memorial garden flickered steadily, a reminder of both what was lost and what was gained. "They thought destroying the Blue Phoenix would silence us," she said quietly to her gathered allies. "Instead, they gave us a voice that will echo for generations." The nightmare Victor Constantine had created when he decided to burn down a bartender's dream had transformed into something he could never have anticipated, a movement that would ensure no other community would have to fight these battles alone. The Blue Phoenix had risen, not just as a single establishment, but as a beacon of hope and justice that would light the way for others facing similar struggles. The fire that was meant to destroy had instead forged something indestructible, a legacy of truth, justice, and community power that would endure long after the last traces of Project Atlantis were cleaned from Providence's soil.